Hi, thank you, Marina, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to have the opportunity to deliver this webinar today on the 2021 Canadian not-for-profit sector salary and benefits survey, and that is a mouthful, Marina. I was practicing it over and over again. Today's agenda, so over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we are going to tell you a little bit about us, the Portage Group, give you an overview of the study and who participated, review the high-level compensation findings, provide some insights into how to use the data, and we'll wrap up with a discussion on the sector and using compensation information to make the case in today's challenging environment. As Marina noted, there will be questions, a question and answer session at the end, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. And just note, we will only be answering general questions about the study and major findings. We're not going to get into details about specifics such as certain benchmarks in the appendix. So a little bit about us. We are the Portage Group. We're a full-service management consulting group focused on the distinct needs of the not-for-profit sector. Combined, our team has served almost 300 associations, regulators, and charities, and we work in the areas of market research, strategic planning, organizational design, and executive recruiting. Our research team has conducted over 250 projects, including over 30 compensation studies for organizations such as Charity Village, the Canadian Society of Association Executives, Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, Ontario Not-for-Profit Housing Association, and many, many others. I am Jeff Thacker. I am the executive partner responsible for research at the Portage Group, and I'm one of its founding partners. I've been conducting research for over 25 years, leading projects of all kinds. And for the last 18 years, I've focused almost exclusively on the association and not-for-profit sector. Among the 250 plus projects I've conducted over the years, I've led over 30 compensation studies, including all 6 of Charity Village's compensation studies. And prior to working in the sector, I spent 7 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I played a lead role in the measurement and market research practice. And over to you, Jack.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and my appreciation to Charity Village for this opportunity. I've worked in and with the nonprofit sector most of my career. I led 3 prominent member-based organizations as CEO before transitioning to consulting, where I focus in leadership, hiring, and strategy. I've worked with hundreds of clients, and they include all types of nonprofits, and that's been complemented by my work as a volunteer in settings such as those advancing education and health. Jeff?
Thank you for that, Jack. So before we get into the results, let's talk a little bit, give a little bit of a study overview. Data was collected through various channels in November 2020. And in all, we had 892 organizations participate in this year's study. Each survey allowed respondents to provide information on compensation and benefits for an unlimited number of individual staff. And in all, we had almost 3,600 positions reported across 6 different staff levels. In some instances, respondents reported positions for groups of staff, so we actually count those. The survey actually represents a total of just over 10,700 individual staff in the sector. Today's webinar focuses primarily on the cash compensation aspects of the study. However, it's important to note that the study also covers the type and value of employment benefits offered in the sector. A few study limitations to keep in mind. First, the compensation figures are as of December 20, so they're brand new, they're fresh. Results are based on survey responses and are only as accurate as the data provided by survey participants. The survey was conducted using Charity Village's subscriber list, webinar list, and social media recruitment, and is not considered a random sample. Because it's not a random sample survey, The results may or may not be an accurate representation of the total nonprofit sector in Canada, and accordingly, the findings of this study reflect the views of only those organizations that participated. Additionally, professional and trade associations, as well as some foundations, were generally not included in the study so as not to skew the data. There are other sources out there that have compensation for those groups. And finally, the overall study results are quite robust, with the almost 900 organizations participating. However, some data for some smaller groups should be interpreted with caution due to smaller sample sizes. So who participated in the study? Well, just over half of participating organizations were headquartered in Ontario, and BC and Alberta were also quite well represented, and we had some organizations from other areas of the country as well. 7 in 10 participating organizations were registered charities. A significant 4 in 10 respondents represent local organizations, while national, provincial, and regional organizations represent just under 1/5 of respondents. And as you can see, we also had a good mix of organizations by size in terms of the number of staff and the annual budget. While many components make up the overall compensation package, by far the most common benchmark is cash compensation. Unlike other components of compensation, the value of cash compensation is easy to compare from one employee to another. And over the next few pages, I'm going to provide some high-level summary results from the cash compensation benchmarks. More detailed and specific benchmark comparisons are available in the report. So here we have a summary of cash compensation by staff level. The big blue bars represent the average base salary, while the small sliver of orange represents the average bonus cash compensation. Not surprisingly, you'll notice that compensation generally increases with seniority. The exception is level 2, senior executives, where the average is slightly higher than it is for level 1. The reason behind this is that while pretty much every organization has a chief executive, most are not large enough to actually have a senior executive position at level 2. Subsequently, these positions are more likely to exist only in larger organizations where pay at all levels tends to be higher. But it is worth noting that in organizations that have both positions, the CEO compensation is almost always the higher of the two. As seen here, CEOs earn on average $99,300 in 2020, of which $97,800 is in the form of base salary. As mentioned, level 2 executives are slightly higher at an average of $101,100, followed by level 3 senior management at $81,300. After that, there's a significant drop off to level 4 at about $63,000, and then the non-management levels in the low to mid 40s. As noted on the previous slide, bonus cash does not represent a significant portion of compensation sector-wide. In fact, only 1 in 10 participating organizations reported offering a formal incentive plan to at least one staff level. CEOs are the most likely to receive bonus cash, with 15% reporting that they received this type of compensation in 2020. Senior management is next at 11%, followed by senior executives at 9%. Across all CEOs, including those that do not receive a bonus, so counting the zeros, the average compensation for the sector, or bonus compensation for the sector, would be 1.2% of base salary. This is the amount represented in total cash compensation benchmarks throughout the report and in the slide that we just saw. If we actually look at only the 15% of CEOs that receive bonus cash compensation, the average is actually 8.3% of base salary. For all other levels, the sector-wide average, including those that do not receive any bonus compensation, is 0.5% or less. And when we look at only those that receive the bonus, the average ranges from 3% to 6.1%. Sorry. So how has compensation changed? Well, from 2018 to 2020, increases in average compensation were actually experienced by all staff levels except for senior management, where there was a slight decline. The strongest growth in total cash compensation was among chief executives at 8.6% for the 2-year period, followed by senior executives at 7.3% and management supervisory staff at 6.9%. Growth at all other levels was a little more modest at 3.5% or less. Now, while some of these growth numbers seem substantial, it's important to note that CEOs, senior executives, and management supervisory staff all saw decreases in their average compensation in the previous study from 2016 to 2018. So if we actually look at the 4-year period, including both studies, so from 2016 to 2020, the average growth in compensation at these levels actually ranges from only 0.2% to 1.7% per year. In other words, looking at the trends over a longer term tends to smooth out some of the study peaks and valleys that we inevitably get. On the whole, compensation in the sector is growing slowly. Over the 9-year period from 2011 to 2020, compensation has grown at an average rate of 0.6% to 1.8% per year, depending on the level. For reference purposes, the average inflation rate over that same time was 1.46%. And if we don't count the anomaly that was 2020, the inflation up to 2019 would have been 1.6%. So over the last 9 years, the only 2 levels where growth in compensation has outpaced inflation is level 4, management supervisory, and level 6, support staff. They both have been running at about 1.8% per year since 2011. Cash compensation at all other levels has grown at a rate slower than inflation, with the next highest growth rate being only 1.25%, which again, that compares to the inflation rate of 1.46. It is important to note that changes in average compensation for the sector staff does not necessarily mean that employees are seeing those same changes. As people move from one job to another, as they leave or enter the sector, as positions are created or removed, the average pay received by workers across the sector can shift. So what about the impact of COVID-19? Well, unfortunately, the study doesn't really point to any impacts from the economic shock of 2020. We didn't notice any significant shifts in the ratio of full-time to part-time or contract staff, and the average compensation actually went up. That said, the study would not capture if people were laid off or if organizations folded. So while it does show the average compensation going up for those who still receive compensation, it doesn't show us anything for those who may no longer be receiving compensation. As an aside, in the coming weeks, we will be doing a pulse survey with Charity Village to look at some of the impacts on the charitable sector. So be sure to watch your email and participate in that survey when it comes. There are many factors that can impact compensation. Some of the key ones, organizationally and personally, or there's a number of them are organizational and personal demographics. So let's start with the organizational characteristics. The highest pay for 5 of 6 levels is found in Ottawa in the current study. The exception is support staff level 6, where Alberta ranks first. The Greater Toronto Area actually ranks second in compensation for 4 of the 6 staff levels. Average compensation at 5 to 6 levels generally increases with the size of the community in which employees are located. The one exception is support staff, where there doesn't appear to be a correlation. Higher budgets and larger staff complements generally correlate to higher compensation at the 4 management levels, with the strongest correlation being among CEOs. And for 5 of the 6 levels, cash compensation generally increases as the organizational jurisdiction broadens from local to international. Now let's look at some of the personal characteristics. Age is often correlates with experience, so it's not really a surprise that there's a strong correlation between age and cash compensation at most levels. In terms of experience, our study looks at 5 different types of experience, including years in the position, in the organization, at the seniority level, in the discipline, and years in the not-for-profit sector. While all 5 of these experience types correlate with compensation, the strongest relationship tends to be with years in the current discipline. And education, higher education generally correlates to higher compensation, particularly if the degree or diploma is relevant to the job. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the highlights, let's look at how we can actually use this data to establish a salary range. The first step in determining proper benchmarks is to determine the applicable profile. So here we have Allison. She is a CEO of a registered charity based out of Vancouver. Allison's 4-year contract is up for renewal, and she needs to gather information to help her and her board agree on a competitive compensation package going forward. Accordingly, she turns to the 2021 Canadian Nonprofit Sector Salary and Benefits Study to help her out. As a first step, Allison creates a profile of her organization and herself, and in addition to the characteristics I just mentioned, she notes that the scope of her charity is local. It is a smaller organization with just 3 staff and an annual budget of about $750,000. And the charity is not formally affiliated with other organizations. And as for Allison, she is 42 years old and she holds a bachelor's degree. So with her profile in hand, Allison turns to page 70 of the report to reference the detailed benchmarks for the CEO position in registered charities. And Allison proceeds to identify all the benchmarks that match her profile. There are 9 in all, and as you can see, we have highlighted them on the page and blocked out the ones that aren't relevant. Allison also decides to probably look at the regional benchmarks, which she finds on page 96 are the benchmarks for the CEO position in BC. And again, she proceeds to identify the applicable or 9 applicable benchmarks in BC. To make life a little easier, Allison copies all the relevant data points into an Excel worksheet. As a starting point, she focuses on the total cash compensation, knowing that this is ultimately the benchmark that she wants to end up at, regardless of what the structure of her compensation package is. But in looking at the table, she also recalls that she saw quartile ranges in the report and wonders if the benchmarks identified line up with her expectations. So to confirm the benchmarks are appropriate for her organization, Allison references the CEO quartile ranges presented on page 68 of the report for registered charities and page 95 for the BC market. Different organizations fit into different classes when it comes to compensation. The class that the organization belongs to will depend on many factors, such as the profile of the charity, constituents it serves, the type of work it does, the size of the organization, etc. And organizations can generally be grouped into 4 groupings or quartiles. The quartile ranges divide respondents into 4 equal groups according to their salary. In other words, 25% fit into each group. These quartile ranges can be used as a basic guideline in deciding the caliber of employee that you wish to attract or retain. And accordingly, you can also use them to determine if the selected benchmarks and the final result actually line up with expectations. So based on her knowledge of her organization and her own profile, as well as her current compensation, Allison identifies that her organization is probably about average in the world of nonprofits. In other words, Allison feels her organization may fit into quartile 2 or quartile 3. In comparing the registered charity benchmarks, she notes that the applicable benchmarks all fall between the middle of the 2nd quartile and the middle of the 3rd quartile for registered charities. Based on this assessment, she determines that the registered charity benchmarks are a valid comparator for her organization. And so she moves on to doing the same check for the BC benchmarks, as she is aware that geographic market can play a significant role in determining compensation. Again, she notes that all the BC benchmarks fall between the middle of quartile 2 and the middle of quartile 3. So again, she is comfortable with the BC benchmarks as being a good comparator for her organization. So now that she's established her benchmarks, Allison can determine an appropriate range for her position. So when setting a range based on the benchmarks, first, there is no one correct approach. The data in the report is only a guideline to point you in the right direction and make decisions based on supporting data. Setting the actual range is part math, it's part judgment. Ultimately, you want to set a range that is competitive enough to attract and retain quality staff. In cases where you have an incumbent, it will be important to keep in mind the cost to replace that staff person. And in deciding on your final benchmarks, you should give the greatest weight to the comparables of closest fit. With that in mind, following are 3 possible approaches based on Allison's chosen benchmarks. The latter 2 are variations of the same approach. So the first approach is simple and straightforward. You identify the high value and the low value in the benchmarks. In this case, the overall BC benchmark is the high at 97,705, and the low is the staff of 1 to 5 under registered charities at 73,179. Together, these would form your range, which rounded is 72,200 to 97,700, and the midpoint of this range, 85,450. Now, one slight variation to consider on this option, or any options for that matter, is dropping the original high or the original low value, and going with the second highest and second lowest. This would be similar to scoring in some judge sports, and the purpose is to eliminate any anomalies in the benchmarks. In a situation like Allison's, this isn't really necessary because there are no real outliers, but for the purpose of our example, we'll go through the process anyway. So we eliminate high and low and select the next 2 values. And if we take this approach, the range becomes 77,500 for which is the registered charities of 500,000 to $1 million, to 96,600, which is the overall charity benchmark, with a midpoint of $87,050. Now note, if you are going to eliminate the low value, you must also eliminate the high value. It's not one or the other. The second common approach is to take the average of all your benchmarks and use this to establish the midpoint, and then you set the range based on a percentage variation. So let's assume you're going to use a 10% variation from the midpoint. As a start, we calculate the average of all benchmarks, which is 88,330, which we round down to 88,300. Next, we calculate the variance, or the 10% variance, which 10% of 88,300 is 8,830. And then to get the range, we simply add this number to the midpoint to get the upper limit of 97,130 and subtract it from the midpoint to get the low value or lower limit of 79,470. You may note that the resulting range of this midpoint or range and midpoint is actually similar to the alternate range approach from the previous method, where we drop the high and low values. This will not always be the case. And we could remove the high and low values from this process as well, but the difference in the midpoint will only be $600. So it doesn't really make a difference to the analysis. The third and final approach, it's similar to the second. The difference is that instead of taking the average of all benchmarks, we actually take the average of the major categories, so registered charities and BC, and use this to calculate the midpoint as the average. So again, we assume that we're looking for a 10% variance. The average for registered charities is just over 87,600, and the average for BC is just over 89,000, giving us a midpoint of 88,330, which you'll note is exactly the same as the previous example. In this case, because we have same number of benchmarks in each grouping, we have 6 in each, it is going to yield the same results using either method. If we had 4 benchmarks in one and 6 in the other, you would have a difference. So this is actually the approach that we use when we do custom analysis. It allows you to give more weight to one factor over another where appropriate. And when we do custom analysis, we actually come up with 3 or 4 of these groupings. The ranges represent the published ranges, and typically an organization will hire qualified staff toward the midpoint of this range. The highest point in the range would potentially be earned by staff senior in the position whose performance is consistently well above average. Allison's personal benchmarks, age and education, those would be used to determine where in the range she falls. And as noted earlier, there are also benefits to consider. The value of these benefits would be in addition to the compensation package, and it's worth noting that at the CEO level, benefits add an average of $10,600 to the compensation package. There are lots of different benchmarks in the report to help you, and we also do custom runs where we go back to the raw data to develop more precise benchmarks where available. And with that, I will turn it over to Jack.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to share some observations regarding the present market and compensation trends, and also how you may want to use this report internally. Knowing some of you may face budget challenges this year, these points may help as you address compensation questions with your board or supervisors. There's no disputing that we're in a very difficult time economically. This week, the head of the International Labour Organization described the global impact COVID is having on employment. Compensation increases where they occur will be modest this year. For many employers, it may not be feasible to increase salaries at this time. Let's set the stage and look at the charitable nonprofit sector's performance over the past 12 months and where we find ourselves in early 2021. I want to acknowledge that the effects of COVID-19 have varied in the charitable sector, with some nonprofits being harder hit than others. Governments, corporations, foundations, and individuals are having to make tough decisions that impact giving. Case in point, many of you will remember that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business had predicted in the last couple of weeks that up to 20% of small businesses in Canada may close. In May of last year, a few months into the pandemic, Imagine Canada reported that charities were experiencing significant and broad-based revenue declines. 69% of those charities reporting had experienced a decline, and almost 1/3 had staff reductions. These declines were steeper than the financial crisis of 2009. Research was updated in November, December, and it was reported that the quote-unquote significant declines of last spring had remained constant. Imagine also reported in December that planned holiday and end-of-year giving in 2020 was on track to be roughly 40% lower than prior annual giving levels. A glimmer of positivity. Canada Helps saw a jump in online giving on December 1st for Giving Tuesday, more than double the previous year. Now, that said, many charities have seen a shift to online giving because donors' other opportunities, such as events, are simply not available to them. In this environment, Imagine further reported that the demand for charitable services in 2020 had increased by 46%. In a nutshell, most of us had to navigate a year with higher demand and fewer resources, including a decline in volunteers. This meant more work had to be done by staff. One takeaway from this picture is that there has never been a more compelling time to express appreciation in tangible ways to the people doing excellent, needed work. Even with your hard work, employers have had to make harder decisions. Almost half of employers changed their compensation plans for 2021 last year due to COVID, according to the HR and compensation consulting firm Gallagher. More specifically, 45% decided to reduce their intended raises for this year, 35% suspended raises altogether, and 6% imposed cuts to existing wages. I don't think it's surprising that employers are reluctant to cut wages unless absolutely necessary due to the repercussions on staff morale. Rather, they reduce expenses, they tap into government programs, possibly furlough or terminate some staff while maintaining salary levels for the performers, the employees they retain. The research from Gallagher is mirrored in results from Morneau Shepell, a company many of you will be familiar with, where 36% of employers reported they froze wages in 2020 because of the pandemic, with a further 13% freezing wages in 2021. For the other employers who are providing increases to staff this year, and a reminder, it's more than half of employers who plan to increase salaries according to various sources. Those increases in 2020 and again in 2021 are falling below 2% across the workforce for all sectors. As you can see from this table, the results in the current Charity Village compensation study are consistent with the information reported by Morneau Shepell. For the charitable nonprofit sector, projected increases range from 1% to 1.8% on average based on the level of staff. In this next chart, we see additional detail by staff level and the magnitude of the expected change. At level 1 for chief staff executives and other senior executives at level 2, the majority are expecting no increase or in some cases a decrease. 52% of CEOs are expecting no increase. As you can see from the light blue bar for other levels, no increases are anticipated for approximately 40 to 50% of staff. The orange color bar reflects increases that will be less than 3%, and we can see here that this applies to 52% of functional and program staff, with about 45 to 49% in a range receiving an increase below 3% for other staff, except executives. Executives, about 3 in 10, expect increases below 3%, with 1 in 10 approximately to receive increases above 3%. Put another way, almost 9 in 10 across all levels either expect no increase or an increase below 3%. Also bear in mind that these are projected for 2021 based on the results in December, reflecting that the amounts could be proposed but won't be implemented until later in 2021, and only then if there is a hoped for performance rebound in the sector. So what may be some options for employers who can't afford increases at this time, or the climate doesn't justify approving higher salaries? One action we have seen is where the board of directors approves the level of increase, 1.5% for example in 2021, but puts on hold the actual implementation of that increase to a later date. This means that the increase is documented and the employer can further build on that increase in future years. Another recommendation, although likely more challenging for many charities, is to extend a one-time performance bonus to deserving staff. A priority focus for employers has been and continues to be employee wellness. 68% of employers have increased their focus on employee wellness. Mindfulness about well-being is supported by action to support staff who are facing pressures at home, through work, possibly financially, and with the overarching impact of social isolation and concern about exposure to COVID. Here are some ideas that appeared in Forbes that employers are encouraged to consider. I know many of our clients are taking these steps, and others, such as having online sessions with coaches, motivational speakers, or providing other resources. The first idea is to make extra effort to express thanks to staff, demonstrate genuine recognition and appreciation. Supervisors also need to be available and visible to their team members. Being responsive in a timely way to texts, to email, is just one simple example. Of course, people want to know what's happening and what it means to them. Err on the side of providing more updates than usual that are candid and transparent. To be an empathetic leader means being mindful of what each staff person is experiencing. It means you need to be proactive, communicate with clarity, and don't guess. Supporting the complete well-being of employees will likely require involvement from the board of directors. Have a concrete plan for these areas. For example, make sure staff know about any employee assistance programs that exist through group benefit plans, and that they're encouraged where necessary to tap into them. While training is also an alternative to salary increases, in this context, think of training that will help staff make it through these difficult times. So now you're ready to take the Charity Village report and build the case. Where to start? Most of us know to support good decision-making with good data. More than ever, be sure your board is aware of performance indicators, market trends, and data that will help them govern with excellence. This is the foundation to their stewardship of the organization. Let's look at 6 points that should help you make the case for changes to salary and other compensation. Your organization is further ahead retaining you than it is replacing you, assuming, of course, you're doing a good job. If you leave, and it's a key role, they'll need to fill that vacancy. Those recruiting and training costs are likely much more than the cost of a salary increase. Decision makers may also not have a full picture of the value you bring. If you've worked many extra hours in the last year and/or delivered extraordinary results, quantify your contribution. Tell that story. Our company has filled management roles in the sector during the pandemic, and it will come as no surprise to you that the usual challenges for a new employee in a new setting are innumerably magnified in these times. That's further reason to retain your best employees through formal recognition. The information in the Charity Village nonprofit sector salary and benefits study is integral to making your case, showing your worth, and defending decisions with objective third-party data. Allow me to reiterate that even when decision makers can't approve salary changes, the report's information lays the groundwork to ensure staff is paid fairly and competitively at whatever point conditions rebound and increases can then go into effect. You also need to be ready and realistic to have credibility with decision makers. If your nonprofit lost $1 million in the last year and its reserve funds will be exhausted in 12 months, that's a different reality, of course, than if your nonprofit has weathered the storm and you've been able to create an equilibrium between revenue shortfalls and savings on the expense side, especially if that balance is due to some results you've helped bring about. Being realistic is also knowing your employer can do the same research each of us has done. They can read about the average salary increase in Canada. They can probably tap into this recording. Norman Vincent Peale once said, "Shoot for the moon, because if you miss, you'll be among the stars." In this climate, you miss. If you exaggerate the facts, you're likely going to be lost in space. Also be realistic in that you're not the only one thinking about compensation, staff recognition, and fairness. Your supervisors, your volunteer leaders are likely having a robust conversation about this topic. If you know they've tried but simply can't afford to improve increases now, don't persist. Come back at a better time. Much of the discussion so far has been about salary or cash compensation, and there may be other changes that can be implemented and from which you'll benefit, such as a title change that will serve your career interests longer term. Additional vacation and support to take more training are perhaps better known options. Possibly you could see about the option to take on external contracts in your own time, provided, of course, they don't conflict with your employer's interests. And I'm sure you're thinking at this point you don't have any time to spare right now, but once again, this might be an ask that, if granted, you'll then have permission to implement when times are better. Benefits often have an associated cost, so an increase to your term life insurance limit or a 1% increase to the RRSP contribution from your employer isn't cash-free, but relatively speaking, they may be more affordable now than would be a salary bump, and you'll continue to reap the benefit in the future. Lastly, we're also hearing that staff and employers are deciding now on what work may look like once the pandemic is behind us. If you're among those who don't miss the long rush hour commutes, the dry cleaning bills, fast food lunches in the food court, this may be a good time to negotiate that you'll work virtually from this point on. As someone who's interviewed thousands of people in my career, I had a lot of respect for Larry King. There are two tips he had which apply just as well to making the case for an increase with your employer. First, don't go into the conversation with demands, ultimatums, or it's my way or the highway tactics. The person you're speaking with probably wants to do the very best he or she can for you. Don't put them on the defensive. If need be, agree to a schedule where you can come back, have that conversation in a few months if it's just not going to be feasible to secure that raise right now. Second, keeping it simple is being brief with the right data, reiterating the value you've delivered, and being clear and realistic about what specifically you're asking for. The baseball player Yogi Berra said, "You don't have to swing hard to hit a home run. If you've got the timing, it will go." The best time is when you over-deliver, when results are known, and you deserve it. Let's think a moment about poor timing. Here are a few examples. Your supervisor comes to tell you that after a lot of proactive hard work and negotiation by them, the board has found the money to give staff a 1% increase. This is not a good time to counter and insist on 5%. At performance review time, it more likely than not is an event on the calendar organizationally where all employees are being reviewed, and most if not all are thinking, as you are, about a salary increase. You may want to be more strategic, such as raising this conversation when you're being thanked for an excellent project or some other big win achievement. Your supervisor is feeling overwhelmed these days too. If you've marked next Wednesday on your calendar to ask about a raise and something happens the day before that puts the boss on edge, defer the ask to a better time. You need to get into your supervisor's shoes and also empathize. If he or she prefers to spend the first hour of the day on emails or writing reports, that's not the best time to go and have the conversation. Similarly, if your supervisor is a facts and figures manager, obviously don't go in unprepared. There are good times to raise the subject as well. Your role may be essential to the start of a new project. Everyone knows you've hit it out of the park for the past year. Before that new project starts, it could be a good time to ask about your compensation because people are mindful that you are indispensable and you deliver value. As you've been listening, you may be thinking the ask this year may be as much fun as a visit to the dentist. My reminder is to draw on your advocates. You may have a volunteer who works closely with you, such as a committee chair who's also on the board of the compensation committee, who could make the case. In larger organizations, your HR professional can take a dispassionate, resource and research-centered approach, making the case based on the facts at their disposal. Use your advocates as allies, even surrogates, when it's possible and appropriate. I've made this point to people in the sector before. It may be that your talents or those of an outstanding employee on your team have outgrown their present employer. As much as that employer may try to do more to not lose you, your future is much brighter and more lucrative elsewhere. It's okay to reach that conclusion and to begin exploring your options. And the good news is that armed with the Charity Village report, you'll know what the position is worth based on your prospective new employer's characteristics, such as budget and scope, and the experience that you bring to it. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Charity Village staff, and we can move to the question and answer. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff and Jack. Great. You've got your contact information there. So I'm just going to pop as well in the chat box, again, just the link to the recording and the discount information as well. So let's jump right into questions. One question that came up quite a bit from the beginning of the presentation. I believe, Jeff, you highlighted that senior executives are actually making more than chief executives. Could you provide a little context as to why that might be the case? Because for a lot of folks, that seemed pretty counterintuitive.
Yeah, so as I outlined earlier, the reality is that the level 2 staff, which the true level 2 is a single position, it would be considered a deputy CEO. And the fact of the matter is that there are very few of those positions available. And in most cases, they tend to be in bigger organizations or higher paying organizations. So if you just take the organizations where those positions exist, the level 2 would be making less than the CEO. But because they're not everywhere, the average for them tends to be higher than the average for the CEO, which the CEO's average includes like the smaller nonprofits, with the small budgets under $250,000, and so on. And level 2 is not typically in those organizations.
Mm-hmm. Great. And could you speak maybe a little bit to how you see bonuses working in the nonprofit sector based on our study findings?
You want to take that, Jack?
I will. So the first thing I'm going to observe is that we have seen more broadly in the nonprofit sector, and by definition, I'll call now nonprofits to include other types of member-based organizations, not only charities, but other kinds of associations. In the association space, we are in some cases seeing compensation can be upwards of 30% of total is coming from bonus. And you might say, well, how is that possible? Why the disparity? Well, in some cases, there may be some limitations in terms of bonus within a charity setting. But the main driver we're seeing, frankly, on that other side of the nonprofit sector is that a lot of business people who populate boards and are working with CEOs and budget committees around compensation changes, of course, are very familiar with bonuses in their own environment. So increasingly, we're beginning to see an upward tick. Now, Jeff can speak to sort of what the trend line has looked in charities. Certainly, again, there can be some limitations or even some restrictions potentially on the magnitude, but it is overall in the nonprofit sector, it would appear to be a growing trend. It's an opportunity for those organizations that perhaps are a little bit smaller in size. Consequently, they're paying base salaries that may not be able to hold staff for longer periods of time, i.e. somebody will always find another employer that can pay them more. And this is an opportunity to say to staff, particularly at more senior levels, if you're hitting these particular targets, you successfully implement the business plan for the new strategic plan. These and others are areas of extraordinary performance for which we will give you an additional reward. I don't know if there's anything you have, Jeff, at your fingertips on the trend line, more so on the charity side than we're seeing in the broader nonprofit sector.
Well, on the whole, the portion of organizations with formal benefits plans hasn't really been moving a whole heck of a lot since we began the study, and also if we look at the study we do in the association sector, the same holds true, that bonuses have just never been common, and it hasn't been growing at any, well, it hasn't really been growing. We have done studies of what we call the blue chip organizations in the association sector, where in those cases bonuses tend to be much more common. There tend to be very high profile organizations, high profile CEOs, and in those cases we've actually seen, the vast majority of those organizations will offer a bonus, and we see direct links between the level of compensation and the bonus. So in other words, the higher the percentage of the bonus, the higher the overall compensation package tends to be. So as Jack mentioned, perhaps it's an opportunity to look for a way to grow your own compensation, or without putting hard dollars up front.
Great. And we've had some questions coming in, probably from folks who haven't seen the report yet. So I'd like to address these. In the presentation today, we talked a lot about sort of more generalities with compensation. Could you speak a little bit to how the report breaks it out in different ways? So things like organization size, focus, things like that, because I think folks are kind of questioning, what impact that makes on compensation.
Yeah, so the first half of the report is a narrative that goes through, it starts by going through all the organizational characteristics, including region, and in region we actually break Ontario out into 3 regions, so it's Ottawa, Toronto, and rest of Ontario. The number of staff, the size of the budget, the jurisdiction they serve. We also have information around the role of the organization. Are they advocacy? Are they providing social services, and so on? The sector that they, or the sector or purpose group they serve is another one that's in there. And we present the breakdown of compensation for each level by those key factors through the first half, and talk about the differences in compensation by group. And then we do the same with personal demographics such as gender, age, experience, education, and so on. And then the second half of the report is a series of appendices where we provide detailed breakdowns for first by type of organization. So there's registered charity and other nonprofits, and in there you saw part of a table today in the presentation for CEOs, for example, for registered charities. So the piece that was covered up in there, that was, you know, all the benchmarks for each of those groupings under registered charities. And we do that for each staff level, as well as doing it for the other nonprofits. And then we do the same thing again by region. And I think we present 6 different regions across Canada. And finally, in the very back of the report, we do have some analysis for specific job titles. So, you know, whether they're a manager or director, or and then it's broken out in the different departments for marketing and fundraising and finance and so on.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. So I think we're going to have to close it there because we are on the top of the hour, but I want to thank both of you, Jeff and Jack, for providing such helpful context to the report. Did either of you have any final comments before we wrap up today?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to present the data and to do the study again, of course. And for everybody who participated, we've been working on it since its inaugural edition back in 2011. And I guess the next one we'll be looking at having done it for a decade. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, and just very briefly noting the time on the clock, the 600 or so plus that were participating today. Thank you very much, and hopefully there were at least a few ideas and some information to take away, and you'll see great value in the report, I'm sure.
That's wonderful. Well, can't thank you enough. And it is exciting to be sort of in a full decade of doing these reports. I know all of the information presented today is going to be so helpful for individuals and organizations who are looking to put this data to use. I do want to remind everyone that the salary report is now available for purchase. If you participated in the survey last fall, you'll be able to purchase with your participant discount code. For those who did not participate in the survey, you can purchase the report at a 15% discount until February 5th. You'll need to enter the discount code 15OFFSR, that's all capital letters, so it's 15 off SR, in the coupon field, and be sure to apply the coupon before completing your purchase. You can visit the link in the chat box or charityvillage.com/reports to get more information about the report and how to purchase. And don't worry, we will include instructions on how to purchase with the discount code in the follow-up email that you receive later today. We'll also have a link to the webinar recording in that email, so please feel free to share that link with your colleagues. Remember, no purchase of the report is necessary to view the webinar. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar, as well as additional information about the report, how to purchase. If you have questions about the report, you can also pop that into the survey with your contact information. We'd be happy to get back to you. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you again for joining us today. We do have a full lineup of webinars planned for this year, and our next session will be held 1 week today on February 4th, and will feature a very popular Charity Village webinar presenter, Daryl Hatton, discussing the top fundraising trends to expect in 2021. So this is a session you don't want to miss. Look for the registration info in the email we send you later today. Thank you again for taking part in today's webinar and for your interest in our salary and benefits report. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.